MMAOddsbreaker.com proudly presents the Premium Oddscast, your home for the best fight picks, bets, analysis, and statistics, hosted by leading MMA oddsmaker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics Kuhn, and myself, MMA journalist Brian Hemminger. Get an inside track from the experts as part of MMAOddsbreaker.com's premium betting service.
Welcome everyone to part 1 of the Premium Oddscast, presented by 5 Dimes. I'm Brian Hemminger, and I'll be joined today by professional MMA line setter Nick Kalikas and MMA statistics guru and recent author of Fightnomics Kuhn to break down this Wednesday's UFC Fight Night 35 event. Before we get to that, let's bring you up to speed on our totals from UFC Fight Night 34 last weekend. Our premium plays went 2-1 in total, with a pair of winning parlays which included Mairbek Taisumov, Max Holloway, Dustin Kimura, and Kyung-Ho Kang, who all very dominant in victory. While our straight bet on Sean Soriano came up short. Overall, we were positive 2 units, which makes 7 straight winning events for MMA Oddsbreaker Premium. Back to the present, UFC Fight Night 35 takes place this Wednesday, January 15th, at the Arena at Gwinnett Center in Duluth, Georgia, and will air live on Fox Sports 1. The event will feature a whopping 12 fights in total. Now, kicking off the preliminary card on UFC Fight Pass is a very intriguing lightweight matchup featuring the returning Charlie Brenneman, who comes in with a 19-5 record, against UFC debuter Beneil Dariush, who is 6-0. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Brenneman minus 245, the comeback on Dariush plus 175. And immediate action coming in on the underdog here. I mean, obviously, Brenneman coming in, taking this fight on short notice. Well, both of these guys are taking this fight on short notice. It's funny because both were replacement fighters originally, and the original matchup between Jason High and Amagov got completely scratched. So this is what we have left, and even at a different weight class, because originally I believe it was supposed to be at 170. This is at 155, Dariush coming in. Brenneman has made the drop to 155 outside of the UFC, so it's a good fight to start things off with. Getting right into it, I mean, we know what we can expect from a guy like Charlie Brenneman. Even in welterweight, the guy was very successful at what he does, which is grappling, taking the fight to the floor, controlling it, and basically looking for a sub-game round and pound, and just dictating where the fight goes. Now, the flaws in Brenneman's game, of course, to me, are the striking aspect of the game. He is improving it. He's working with a good camp. He always has. So he's constantly working on that area, but that's definitely still his biggest weakness. He's not as confident on the feet as what I like to be, and in fact, sometimes he tends to backpedal and fold against heavy aggression, and I understand. But that being said, styles are everything, and the way he matches up with Dariush could be very beneficial from him. That's why he's coming in as the betting favorite here. Now, on the other hand, Dariush brings to the table is a lot of hype and a lot of I guess, prospectability from the diehards in the sport. I mean, he trains with a good camp out of King's MMA, but he's been around that scene, training with good partners and kind of revolving, moving from spot to spot for a while and training with different people. So there has been that little buzz about him. And the biggest part of Dariush's buzz is basically his grappling and his BJJ ability. I mean, the guy has a solid grappling background, won several events in jiu-jitsu and grappling competitions along the way, and he basically made his UFC debut off of his grappling ability because he was having so much success. Now, that being said, he's developed his game. He's a lanky, tall striker, so he's got that going for him. He's also a southpaw. So on the feet, I think it will be competitive because Dariush isn't exactly a great striker, but he's still developing those skill sets. But he does have a slight edge, I believe, over Brenneman. I mean, with that lanky striking ability, he does have a little bit of power that comes with it. And again, he kind of mixes everything in halfway decent. I mean, he has decent clinch work. It's just not, I guess, the best attribute of his game by far. It's the grappling aspect. So, in my opinion, this is a difficult fight for Brenneman because no matter where this fight takes place, whether it's on the ground, Dariush is very good at submissions, obviously. He likes to even get transition and try to reverse and get top control. He could be effective with his ground and pound. And just alone with the submission game, I mean, Dariush is at a good advantage over most people. But that being said, I think Brenneman can control the tempo of this fight. He can get the takedowns because if any weakness in Dariush's game, it's definitely that he could be put on his back. And if you can avoid the submissions from him, I think you're going to have, obviously, some decent success, and that's exactly what Brenneman should be able to do here. So I think it's almost a dog or pass situation because, like I said, Dariush on the feet or on the ground is going to cause a lot of problems to Brenneman, but ultimately it's going to be Brenneman's grinding style, his ability to control the tempo of this fight, and put Dariush on his back and stay out of submissions. That's probably going to get him the W. So I'm going to go and pick Brenneman as far as my pure pick goes, but it might be a dog or pass situation.
I'm more confident in Brenneman than you are, Nick. He's got solid experience against top competition. I mean, he has been in there against Eric Silva, Anthony Johnson, Rick Story, Jason High, all these guys. Mixed results, but I mean, he did pick up some wins against some top guys. I mean, at one point, he was ranked, in the top 10 in the UFC welterweight division. I think that was off, but, he was still there. And, ever since he got released from UFC, he dropped down to lightweight. He's gone 4-0 with 3 finishes, and these were all against pretty tough guys, especially most recently where he defended the CFFC lightweight title against Kyle Baker, ends up outpointing Baker on the feet and then finishing him with a submission on the ground. So he's actually increased his aggression, taken some more risks at the lightweight division. He's a little more confident now. He's not quite worried about these monsters, these huge guys that can just overpower him and knock him out. Now, the one knock on Brenneman, of course, is his chin. He's been in there against some really big guys, and he's taken some big shots in his career. I mean, obviously, Johnny Hendricks knocked him out, although Brenneman did win the first round against Hendricks, actually, and then Anthony Johnson blasted him. So, I mean, he has taken some punishment. Kyle Noak finished him. So that is one thing to be worried about. But so Darius does have some power, but I don't really see Darius being able to land it. He's not very technical at all on the feet. He's kind of this big one-punch power type of guy, and then tries to close the distance. What Darius is good at, he is pretty sharp on the ground. He was a no-gi champion at blue belt, purple belt, brown belt, and then he actually retired from competition and focused on MMA the second he got his black belt. But for all the hype around him, you got to show me and prove it. And in MMA, even though he's 6-0, he hasn't really shown it. He has stepped in there against complete, absolute garbage competition. I mean, it is terrible, the guys that he has been fighting. One of his most recent fights, where he got the knockout, that guy's on a 5-fight losing streak. He's only faced one guy that's ever had a winning record, and that guy's 3-2. So, I mean, there's really not a lot to go on based on his performances. And these are guys that he should be murdering, and, he's not putting them away quickly. So that does concern me, that him stepping up to significantly, not even close, Brenneman is way better than anybody that Darius has ever fought. And really, unless Darius catches him with a big shot coming in, I just don't see any way that Brenneman doesn't at least grind out a decision here. So my pick is definitely Brenneman, and I think that I got a lot of confidence that he's going to pull this one off. So our next play is on the prelims is another lightweight battle featuring Ultimate Fighter veteran Vince Pichel coming in with a 7-1 record, taken on Indiana native Garrett Whiteley with an 8-1 record. Both guys lost their UFC debuts, but Nick, where did you open this line, and what has the betting public told you?
Pichel -150, Whiteley +110. That was my opening number, and it's staying pretty ballpark at the sports books, because right now, looking at 5 dimes, Pichel is -155. And basically across the screen, he's staying steady around that. And I'm expecting a very competitive fight here. It's unfortunately both these guys are coming off of their official UFC debuts, suffering knockout losses. But these guys do bring a lot to the table, and it should be a fun fight. I'm starting with Whiteley. His striking is actually pretty impressive in the fact he's aggressive and he's got solid hands. He throws a lot of different combinations, mixes everything up well. His hooks, his jabs, his uppercuts, his knees, and he's got KO power to go along with it. Now, he trains with a phenomenal camp, well, I say at least training partners, a few of them. Chris Lytle, to be a little bit more exact. I mean, Chris Lytle is a tremendously well-rounded fighter, especially when it comes to the grappling aspect of things. I mean, so you know that Whiteley, even on the ground, he's going to be game. He has solid takedown defense. He's got some submissions to go along with it, and he's got the ability to really keep the fight standing and dictate where the fight goes, because he's, a solid, well-rounded fighter. Now, my concern with Whiteley, though, is defensively he does tend to leave a little bit of openings. I mean, that's how he got plastered with that left hook last time in his debut fight. So he is a little suspect in that area. But then again, looking over Vince, he's pretty much a similar type of fighter. I mean, the striking with Pichel, he does push forward again. He throws solid hands, a nice little 1-2 combo. And he basically likes to push forward to get you up against the fence and maybe try to use his takedown game to go along with it, because he is a very complete fighter as well. His grappling is underrated, actually. He does pursue the takedowns, as I mentioned. And he has decent ground and pound and basically solid off of his back. So wherever the fight takes place, even if he is on his back, he attacks with submissions. He's able to scramble up well. And more times than not, he's able to keep the fight on the feet. Against both of these guys, against very solid wrestlers, will be in some trouble. But the way they match up, I think that this fight is probably going to end up staying up on the feet because their takedown defense is probably going to neutralize each other out with the wrestling. So, again, we're going to have a very competitive fight. I think, again, Pichel is also solid everywhere. He's also very tough, and he's just a little bit more, I think, at this stage of his career, he's a little bit more solid and put together. So I have a little bit more confidence in Vince Pichel than I do Whiteley at this stage. I'm going to go out and pick Pichel to win this fight, but again, I'm expecting another very competitive fight that realistically could go either way. But I think Vince is going to come through and get the nod here. Whiteley is going to be game, though.
Yeah, normally I would think Vince would win significantly more often, but there are a couple red flags in here. The first one is on Whiteley's side, where not being a full-time fighter, that is seriously way against you. But with Pichel, he had the shoulder injury after getting suplexed to hell by Rustam Khabilov in his UFC debut, and he got the surgery like last February, and he has not fought since then. He's been out of competition he didn't fight at all in all of 2013. So that's a red flag. So you've got a guy coming in a long layoff against a guy that's at least been active, even if he did get knocked out in the first round. So both guys coming off first round TKO or knockout losses, which is scary. But overall, Pichel is still the better fighter in my opinion. He's very aggressive on the feet. He throws a lot of strikes. Neither guy has very good stand-up defense, which is scary again. But I think Whiteley, he's actually 33 years old, so he's a little bit older. And then he took a big shot in that last fight, and there's no way that Whiteley's going to be able to do to Pichel what Khabilov was able to do. That was just a freak, Russian suplex machine, and that's just not what Whiteley is. On the feet, Whiteley does use his knees and elbows well when he gets on the inside. He has a decent length. He has decent length. He uses it okay, but I think that can get overwhelmed a little bit from Pichel's aggression. And occasionally, Whiteley will shoot in for takedowns. Pichel is susceptible a little bit, but Pichel has decent sweeps. He goes for stuff off his back. He's does a good job of neutralizing offense. And when Pichel gets on top, he's nasty. He has some really good ground and pound, very sharp elbows. You saw that in his fight to get on the show of The Ultimate Fighter. So, he is capable. Both guys definitely are flawed, though. So I'm picking Pichel, but the big red flags on this are keeping me from, betting on it for sure. So my pick is definitely Pichel, though. Now, moving on, the first fight on the Fox Sports 1 prelims, I believe, is a flyweight battle featuring Alpetkin Oskilic, who is 9-1 overall and 1-0 in the UFC, taking on UFC newcomer, the Hawaiian Louis Smolka, who is 6-0 overall. So, Nick, what's the oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Oskilic -300, Smolka +220. That was my opening number. Another line that's staying basically ballpark, because look at it 5 times right now. Oskilic is -270 or so at the time of the recording. And across the screen, he's staying ballpark about just under 3-1. I think that line's right based on the way these guys match up. Obviously, Smolka making his UFC debut. He does come from a solid fight camp. The 808 crew out of Hawaii. Impressive last UFC card, going 3-0 with the likes of Max Holloway and crew over there. So he trains with good training partners for sure. And there's a lot of nice features about Smolka actually making his debut. He's another one of these long, rangy type of strikers. He's not really a striker, so I'm not claiming that he's a striker, but I'm saying on the feet, that's the kind of striking he has. He's lanky. He's effective with his kicks and knees. I think that's really his best attribute standing. He still has to develop his overall game, but he really, more so than anything, looks to use his striking to get inside and close the gap, because he is a grappling-based fighter. He's got very good submissions. He's very dangerous off his back because he's got those long limbs, and he knows how to use them. He does try to scramble and look for top position and land ground and pound as well. So he's a pretty complete fighter, but still developing his striking aspect of the game. But he is a finisher, so there's a little bit of hype behind him. There's definitely potential behind Smolka, but I mean, facing Oddscast in your UFC debut is not an easy task because Oddscast is a very complete fighter in his own right, and I think he's obviously going to have the wrestling advantage in this fight. Starting off with Oddscast's boxing, I mean, his hands are solid. He's developing those as well. I mean, he's gradually getting better, and you can see it, but he's got nasty power in both hands. I mean, that's definitely an area that just comes naturally to him, obviously. He mixes everything up well. He has a nice jab, a powerful right hand, and he likes to throw combos, which is I'm impressed with. A lot of fighters like to throw one punch and then stop, and he does throw a couple combinations as he pushes forward a little bit, and he is aggressive. His grappling is pretty solid. He's got good takedowns, very good takedown D, and his ability to scramble out of bad spots is really as well. So he's pretty well-rounded again, and I think he's going to basically have a slight edge in this fight no matter where it takes place. I think Smolka has the pure submission advantage in this fight, but Oddscast has good submission defense. He's got the wrestling advantage. He should be able to plant Smolka on his back, and even if it stays on the feet, Smolka's probably going to give him some trouble with his range, but Oddscast is still going to be more effective, I think, with his hands in his overall game because he does throw in kicks as well, and he's I think a little bit further along in his career as far as potential goes at this point. So I'm going to pick Oddscast because I think he should get the job done more times than not, but I'm definitely looking forward to seeing Smolka in his second or third fight in the UFC because I do think that he's going to gradually improve, and he could be a threat in the 125 weight class, no doubt.
Yeah, looking back at Oddscast's UFC debut against Darren Yanayama, Oddscast actually got outstruck in the first 2 rounds on the feet. It was the fact that Yanayama kept going for takedowns and then pulling guard that really hurt him and allowed Oddscast to end up taking all 3 rounds on the judges' scorecards most likely. So, Oddscast, while he is decent on the feet, he is a bit fallen in love with his power. He goes for just the single power shots. He loves the left hook. He'll lunge forward with that, and that can get a little predictable. So if Smolka was a more refined striker, I think Smolka could have taken advantage of that. But Smolka, he'll throw like a lead right hand. Maybe he'll, throw out a kick, but then he just kind of closes the distance and either gets to the clinch or tries to get it to the ground. And he's been able to bully a lot of opponents and get the fights to the ground where he is really dangerous with ground and pound. But I just don't see him being able to do that against Oddscast. Oddscast has better top control. He doesn't have amazing takedowns; they're decent. But Smolka is a guy that's susceptible to the takedown. So if Oddscast wants to take it down, he can. And on the feet, Oddscast should be able to outstrike him. Smolka, it's just a shame that he's not taking some pointers from Max Holloway because he could be a decent striker, but he prefers to be a ground fighter. So going into this fight, I really think that Smolka's biggest strength, which is his top control and ground and pound, it's going to be neutralized. So you're basically taking out. He's basically bringing a knife to a gunfight in this bout. So I see Smolka shooting in for takedowns, but I see him getting denied a lot. And Oddscast is clever enough on the ground to be able to avoid most of Smolka's submission attempts. Basically, what Smolka does is he beats on guys until they give up submissions. So I don't see him being able to pull off a submission against Oddscast when they're both fresh and when Smolka's having to do a lot of stuff in his guard. So Smolka has taken some big punishment on the ground. He's been opened up by top control fighters, and then usually he'll just survive and then take over late. And I don't see him being able to do that. Oddscast actually came on real strong in the third round against Yanayama and actually hurt him on the feet in the third round. So he still has power late in the fight. My only concern for Oddscast here is he fought a month ago. He took this fight on super short notice, so he's clearly not going to be any better than the fighter he was a month ago, but I still think the fighter he was a month ago is good enough to beat Smolka. So my pick is definitely Oddscast to take this one out. So let's move on to the next fight on the preliminary card. We've got a very intriguing middleweight matchup featuring Trevor Smith, who comes in with a 10-4 record, against Brian Houston, who is 4-1 overall. Both guys are 0-1 in the UFC, so could be a loser leaves town match. So Nick, where'd you open this one, and how has the betting public shifted things?
crazy fight here because you got your typical grappler versus striker, in my opinion, in this match. I did open up Smith minus 155, the comeback on Houston plus 115. Starting with Houston, I mean, what we got to see in his debut against Brunson, unfortunately, wasn't much. I mean, he got caught with that kick right away and got put out. He got choked out. But he did show some heart. He tried to hang in there and not tap, and he eventually had to with Brunson. So he did show me some heart there. He just, like, again, we can't really gauge much off that performance. So with Houston, it was so short. You have to go back and look at his pre-fight footage before he came into the UFC, that is, and see how he fared there. And what I see from him in those fights is definitely a lot of athleticism. I mean, he's a big, powerful guy for the weight class, no doubt about it. He's got some decent wrestling to go along with his athleticism for sure. He's developing his game with ATT. There's no doubt about it. So it's scary what kind of potential this guy does have. But there's still some flaws in his game. I mean, he's only 6 fights into his career. This will be a 6th fight, if I'm not mistaken. So he's still relatively... A lot of things about his game are relatively unknown, and I think he's going to have some flaws that Smith can potentially exploit in this spot. Houston's going to basically need to keep this fight standing, and he's got tremendous knockout power and use his boxing and his power, raw power, to knock Smith out. And if Smith has a weakness in any aspect of the game, it is his chin. It's the ability that he has to stay up and bang with good strikers. I know he had a little bit more success in his last fight against Herman, but still, make no mistake, Houston gets the opportunity, he's going to probably knock Smith out. So Smith is going to have to look to get this fight to the ground. Now, he doesn't have great wrestling, but once he does get the fight to the floor, he's definitely a threat at 185. I mean, the guy can fast. I mean, he's dangerous around your neck. He grabs on to a lot of submissions, and he grabs onto them fast. He sets up the way he sets up subs in most cases. Now, looking at his resume and his recent performances, obviously Smith has fought solid competition, so he hasn't really come through in those spots. But against Houston, that's a whole different animal. I think Houston, again, has that prospect ability, but Smith is actually taking a step down in competition here. So I think if he does get the fight to the floor, he can exploit some weaknesses in Houston's ground game. Now, that's the stern test, though. Is Smith going to be able to give Houston down because his wrestling isn't that good? But more times than not, Smith does manage to get the fight to the floor. And if that's the case, I do think that he's going to exploit, like I said, Houston's weak ground game. I think so. I got to go on a limb here and pick Smith. It's not a very confident pick because I do think that it's either going to be Smith by submission in this fight or Houston by knockout. And I could realistically see it going either way. So it's possibly another dog or pass situation. But as far as pure fight experience and at this level, at this stage of their career, I got to go with Smith because I think he can weather maybe an early storm, eventually get the fight to the ground, and possibly submit Houston. So, again, not very confident, but I'm going to go with Smith here.
Yeah, looking at this fight, I got to disagree with you this time. Smith, he does have, the grappling ability, but I don't think he uses it as often as you're giving him credit for. And he definitely doesn't, get a lot of submissions, at least recently. Most of the time, if the fight goes to the ground, he will occasionally shoot in. He doesn't have that good at takedowns. You did see him put Ed Herman on his back for about 10 seconds in his last fight, but most of that fight was took place on the feet. Smith is a bit of a brawler on the feet. He's not technical whatsoever. He is strong in the clinch. He pushes forward. He's aggressive, but he likes to just stick with the big power shots. So when he's at distance, he goes for overhand rights, big lead left hooks, stuff like that. But his striking defense is kind of terrible. I mean, he got clipped with some monster shots from Ed Herman in their fight, but he just kept going forward. I mean, he doesn't always have that durability. Ed Herman is not a renowned striker or anything, but I mean, when Smith fought at light heavyweight, he got finished in about a minute by Gian Vellante, so he does have that susceptibility to get knocked out. It just might have to be the right opponent. Overall, though, Smith does have some decent kicks, but they leave him wide open to counters. So he does that big openings that he leaves can get taken advantage of by the right type of striker. So, and I think Houston might be that type of striker. You look at his background. He's a 2011 Thai boxing champion. He's got pretty strong striking credentials that date back about 5 years or so. He does have a really quick jab that he likes to flick out. He prefers to fight from a distance and get that big one shot in. Has decent training in Nebraska, but I like his power. He's technical. He's explosive. He's got decent takedown defense. It's getting better over time. That last fight really, I think, left a bad taste in people's mouth just because, he opened the fight, he threw a couple strikes, and then, Derek Brunson clipped him with the head kick that he didn't see coming. He should have seen it coming because Brunson throws it, but, maybe he just didn't do his homework and he got caught, basically. So I'm hoping that people are just soured on him a little bit just because, his UFC debut lasted like a minute. So, and it wasn't a good minute, but I think I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt here. I don't think he's going to get caught off guard again. Even Smith, if Smith wanted to catch him with a head kick, I don't think Smith has the flexibility to do it. I've never seen him really kick higher than the body. So, this is going to be a stand-up fight in my opinion. I think he keeps it standing, and I like Houston to pick Smith apart. He is the superior striker. He's technically sound. So I see Smith, kind of charging forward, trying to make this a brawl, maybe get it in the clinch. But if Houston can, keep his distance, he's going to score a lot of points, potentially knock him out. So my pick is Brian Houston. So we're going to move on to the lightweight division. We have Isaac Valley Flag, veteran, coming in with a 14-3-1 record, taking on Elias Silverio with a 9-0 record. Both guys 1-0 currently in the UFC. So Nick, where'd you open this one, and how's the public shifted things?
Silverio minus 125, Valley Flag minus 115. That was my opening number. Basically a pick'em fight with a slight lean towards Silverio. Right now, it's basically a pick'em fight. I mean, across the board, there is a slight lean towards Valley Flag in some spots, so he's getting a little bit more love from the betting public, but it's staying stable. And I do believe it's a pick'em type of fight here because it's interesting how these guys match up. I mean, Valley Flag's kind of been one of these veteran fighters. He's been around for a long time, and he's finally getting his opportunity in the UFC, and he's proven he's belonged. I mean, he's fought solid competition, and his ability, what impressed me the most about Valley Flag is he's not really great anywhere. I mean, starting off with his striking, he does push forward, he throws hands, and they're decent. He has decent boxing, but he's a little slow. But what the impressive part about him is he does continue to push forward. He has a ton of heart, and he makes life difficult because the pace he pushes, really, standing up or even on the ground. I mean, up against the cage. And once he gets you there, his fight IQ is decent. I mean, he knows when to throw shots. He knows when to throw knees. He knows when to throw elbows. He mixes things up well. And again, that constant pressure is always tough to defend against. So even though Valley Flag's not really a fighter that you can say, man, he's dangerous in this aspect or he's great at this, he's not really great at anything. You just know what you get out of him. You know you're going to get a consistent performance and a guy that really, in most cases, turns it on as the fight goes on. In round 2 and round 3, Valley Flag actually performs and gets stronger as it goes on, when most fighters, including Silverio, tend to slow down. So that is impressive, and I do respect Valley Flag and what he's accomplished. He belongs in the UFC, and he's proven that. But that being said, I think that Silverio is a difficult matchup for him. I mean, he's making his debut at 155 in the UFC. He was a Jungle Fight 170-pound champion. Now, he did have a fight back in Ring of Combat at 160. It was a catchweight fight, so he's fiddled with it before. This isn't going to be relatively new to him, but he has had most of his fights at 170. He was kind of big at 170, kind of strong at 170, so he's going to be even, I think, physically better at 155, no doubt about it. So that's one thing that Valley Flag is going to have to deal with is, I think, the physical size of Silverio. Not to mention, I mean, his striking. Silverio's striking, even though he doesn't push forward and Valley Flag's a little bit more aggressive overall, I mean, he could pick you apart. Silverio has a Muay Thai striking background. He's great leading with his kicks, and he punches with authority. I mean, the guy definitely has a lot of power, and he mixes things up well. I mean, he goes to the body, he uses nice elbows, he has a nice clinch game, and he throws decent combinations as well. So striking, the guy lands efficiently, the guy lands with power, and, I mean, that's definitely his best attribute. But what also impresses me with Silverio is his ground game. I mean, for being basically a Muay Thai practitioner, he's developed his ground game. He has solid takedowns, and he has solid ground and pound from the top. He gets put on his back. He manages, again, to get out of position, get out of that bad position, scramble back, use the cage to his benefit more times than not as well. So I think Silverio is going to keep on improving in that aspect of his game. He's a younger fighter. He's only 27, where Valley Flag, I believe, is 35 years old. So he's got that going for him as well. He's a younger, fresher fighter. And I think the improvement level that we're going to see out of Silverio is going to kind of trump Valley Flag at this point. So I'm looking for an impressive debut at 155 for Silverio. I think it's going to be a very competitive fight that goes back and forth. But ultimately, Silverio, his ability to outpoint and outstrike Flag is going to come through here, and I think he is going to get the decision nod. he can even accumulate enough damage on Valley Flag where we might possibly get a stoppage. Because I know one weakness of Valley Flag's also is his facial tissue does tend to get beat up a little bit. He tends to bleed and cut. So that's one little aspect that we also have to consider in the back of our minds. But my pick is going to be Silverio in another close competitive fight.
You know, Valley Flag kind of reminds me of some other types of Jackson fighters where, you know, that likes to push the pace, moves forward, throws a lot of strikes, and even though they're not that technical, you know, they can, you know, convince the judges that they won the fight. You know, you look at Leonard Garcia, Diego Sanchez, Clay Guida, that type of mold where they've got good conditioning and they just keep pressing forward, you know, even if they don't have a lot of power, don't have a lot of everything else. So that's the type of fighter he is. The problem with Valley Flag is, you know, he's 35 years old, he doesn't have a lot of power, he doesn't have a lot of technique, and, you know, if he faces the right type of fighter, you know, he can get lit up. You know, that his one other big issue, you know, close fights, you know, even fights that he should win are crazy close usually. His last 3 were all split decisions on his end. So that is a concern to me. But, you know, looking at this fight, I really do like Ilias Silverio, man. You know, he made the UFC debut at welterweight. He looked pretty sharp. Dropped down. He's dropping down to 155, but he's got good power. He was a Jungle Fights champion, and that power should translate even more so at 155. He's got the longer reach. He, you know, and this, even though he's a guy that, you know, was almost spent the most of his career in Brazil, this isn't his United States debut. He fought in Ring of Combat in New Jersey, so, you know, he's been here, he's done that a little bit, so, you know, this isn't just going to be completely new to him, which can have an effect on fighters. And I think Silverio's conditioning isn't so bad, though it is a little untested, especially down here at 155, where Valley Flag has a big strength is not just the pace he pushes and the forward pressure. It's sometimes he'll get guys in bad positions. He likes to put them in the clinch, but I think Silverio is really strong in the clinch. Even if he gets his back against the fence, he's going to be throwing a lot of knees. So these guys will be trading a lot of damage, and Valley Flag's going to be the guy that's going to be showing it a lot more, I think. You know, he gets busted up a little bit in fights, and, you know, just looking at it from a neutral perspective, I just think Silverio is going to do a lot more damage in this fight, and it's probably going to show. I can see Silverio dropping him. I can see Silverio finishing him, and I think Valley Flag's only way to win is to just keep pushing until he could potentially win a close decision. So I like Silverio to potentially win a decision or to get a stoppage, and just with more methods to win, I think you know, Silverio is definitely the way to go here. So we're going to move on to the final fight of the UFC Fight Night 35 prelims. We have a pair of Ultimate Fighter veterans from Season 13 in Ramsey Nijum, the finalist, coming in with an 8-4 record, taking on Justin Edwards, who is 9-3 overall, and Edwards is dropping down to lightweight for the first time. So, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
Nijum minus 170, Edwards plus 130. That was my opening line. A little bit more early support coming in on Edwards. I mean, he dropped down. Well, actually, the line tightened up a little bit, but there was support coming in. Nijum's now down to minus 150, and Edwards still around plus 130 or so. Another competitive fight. I mean, I think a lot of people are supporting Edwards because they believe, I mean, Nijum's stock has really dropped. I mean, getting beat last, well, I should say not just in his last fight that he got submitted pretty quick, but his performances recently haven't looked that great. But the way these guys match up, Nijum could come through and get back on the winning track here in this fight, because Edwards has some advantages in this fight, but one that he's not going to have is the pure ground game. Getting into Edwards' striking, though, I mean, he's another guy that actually is underrated on the feet a little bit. He does mix up things well. He's got decent kicks, decent power on his feet, decent speed, actually, and he does push forward. He also has a nice right hook to highlight his boxing, and he's got some spinning kicks, actually, to highlight his kicking. So he can be dangerous if you're not really expecting some striking from Edwards, no doubt about it. But on the feet, defensively, Edwards keeps his hands low, so that is a concern. He gets tagged often. I don't think he's really going to have to worry about that with Nijum, because Nijum's going to come in looking to take him down. But getting into that part of the game, I mean, Edwards is susceptible to the takedown. He has good grapple, a dangerous guillotine choke, as most of us know. And he's a pretty good scrambler, and he's got good jiu-jitsu, no doubt about it. But what worries me is, I mean, if you look at it, Edwards has been playing on his back so often, and even though it's not easy to keep Edwards down, I feel like Nijum is what he does best. So I think that as the fight goes on, Nijum is going to be, maybe it's going to be a little bit closer early on, but Nijum is going to take control of the fight as it goes, and I think he's going to be able to plant Edwards on his back and control, possibly even get the sub. Nijum's striking continues to improve. He does have flaws in that area. I should cover that as well. But I do see him being a little bit more aggressive and a little bit more confident on the feet. I mean, he's developed kind of a decent lead jab if he uses it well, and he follows up with a decent right hand after it. He does use his knees from the clinch, which was surprising, but he does push up against the fence. So he does a lot of things well as far as like winning fights, outpointing a person, and again, with his grappling, that definitely is the best attribute of his game. So back and forth we go in this fight. I think it's going to be another competitive battle, but again, I think Nijum is eventually going to find his way to the ground, land in top control, land some ground and pound, and at least get a decision win here in this fight. So I'm going to pick Nijum to get the W over Edwards, despite the public support of Edwards.
Yeah, I got to agree overall on Nijum. The one thing, it's kind of funny, both of these guys got absolutely blasted on The Ultimate Fighter Season 13 by the eventual winner, Tony Ferguson. But, coming into this fight, I think Edwards is 31, Nijum is 25 years old. The biggest difference, clearly to me, is the grappling ability. Nijum is really solid wrestling. He's very good from top position. He wins scrambles. He has solid ground and pound, and he has decent submissions. With Edwards, he's aggressive on the feet. He's not that technically sound anywhere, but he does like to push the pace, move forward. He'll get into the clinch, but I think that the big problem for Edwards is, he can be controlled on the ground. I mean, we saw that against John McGuire, and McGuire's, Nijum's size, he was a lightweight basically fighting in the welterweight division, and McGuire, was all over Edwards in their fight. And I think Nijum has better wrestling than McGuire, so, that's a little bit of MMA math, but at least it makes sense. And a couple red flags, though, while both guys have been knocked out multiple times, I think Nijum's chin is definitely worse on the feet. If somehow Edwards can keep it standing, even though Edwards is not a great stand-up fighter, he's better than Nijum. Nijum is just so sloppy and terrible on the stand-up. He has really big defensive holes. He's got a bad chin, a lot more one-punch type of knockout badness on Nijum's part, where he can get hit with one shot and hurt, where you look at a guy like Edwards, it takes a lot to put him out usually. Brandon Thatch teed off on him for about 40 seconds straight before finally getting the finish when in Edwards' last loss. So I think Edwards is a little more durable. And another thing that does scare me a little bit, Nijum was submitted really quickly by James Vick in his last fight due to a guillotine choke, and that is Edwards' probably best move. You saw that in the Josh Neer fight, where Edwards just latched onto a guillotine choke, tapped him out, actually choked him unconscious in 45 seconds, one submission in the night. So that is a bit of a concern. Maybe Edwards could latch on to a guillotine choke, but I think Nijum has been focusing on that a lot since that happened. I would be surprised if he got caught off guard with the guillotine in this fight. But overall, I do think that Nijum gets this fight to the ground more often than not, and he should probably at least win a decision where Edwards is kind of fighting off his back the whole time but can't do anything about it. Now, moving on to the UFC Fight Night 35 main card, we have a thrilling featherweight contest featuring a pair of Ultimate Fighter veterans in Cole Miller from The Ultimate Fighter Season 5, coming in with a 20-8 record, taking on Sam Sicilia from Tough Season 15, who comes in with a 12-3 record. Now, Nick, what are the MMA odds makers' perspective on this one?
Well, my opening line, Miller minus 165, the comeback on Cecilia plus 125. Right now, looking at the line over to 5 dimes. Not a ton of movement, but a little bit more support coming in on Miller. Did bounce down, and now climbed back up. It's minus 185 for Cole Miller. This is an interesting fight because you have Sam's knockout power versus Cole's all-around MMA ability. I know he gets a lot of slack sometimes, Cole Miller does, for his stand-up game, but I think overall his stand-up game is a little bit underrated. I mean, he's a tall, lanky striker, so for one, that gives a lot of people difficulties in matching up with him. He does have decent boxing. He uses his kicks well. He lacks that true KO power, but he can accumulate some shots and get you in trouble from time to time. And then, of course, if Cole Miller is put on his back, he's dangerous as heck. He's got great submissions. One of the slickest guys in the featherweight division by far as the ground game goes. He does look to get top position as well. He's probably not going to be able to do that against Sam because Sam obviously has the wrestling advantage, the raw power advantage here. But he's just not the complete MMA fighter that Cole Miller is. So I think Sam's going to probably want to keep this on the feet and try to outstrike Miller and catch him that way and probably knock him out. And it's possible. I think that Sam has enough power and he's capable of doing that. He is improving his overall game. And again, he can dictate where the fight goes. But as far as the grappling realm, if it does get anywhere near the floor, I think Miller is eventually going to take control and win this fight. So I'm going to have to go out on a limb here, and not too much of a limb, obviously, because Miller's a favorite, but I know there's a lot of people supporting both guys here, but I'm going to pick Cole Miller. I think he gets the job done more times than not in this fight.
Yeah, and I got to go with Miller, too. You just look at what he's capable of doing right now, and, he's starting to come into his own in the featherweight division. He had a bit of a rough start against, Nam Phan and Steven Seiler, guys that, took advantage of him on the feet a little bit, but those guys mixed it up a lot more than what Sam Sicilia does when he's standing. The way that Sicilia fights, his best defense is really a good offense. He just keeps his hands low. He throws everything from the hip. It's real telegraphed. It's big looping hooks or big looping uppercuts. He doesn't really throw a lot of kicks. He doesn't throw a lot of straight punches. He hardly ever jabs. So that's going to be a lot easier for Miller to predict and Miller to defend. And, Miller, while he hasn't really started to use his big reach in the featherweight division that well, he does have a really nice straight right hand, straight left as well, when he throws it with power. So he can clip Sicilia when Cecilia's winding up for these huge shots. And, something else to take into consideration is I think that, one of Cecilia's best offensive abilities is, he gets the credit for the power on the feet, but he gets a lot of damage in from taking people down and ground and pound. And if he does that against Cole Miller, I think he's going to be in a lot of trouble. I mean, sure, he was able to beat up, Godofredo Pepe in his last fight on the ground, but, he gets on top of Cole Miller. He's, entering a world of pain. Miller has fantastic sweeps, an extremely active guard. He can catch him with a lot of stuff. Another thing I really like is I think Miller's starting to mix it up a little better on the feet too. He throws some good low kicks. He's really powerful if he can get his opponent in the Muay Thai clinch. I think he took that from his fight with Seiler. So I just think overall Miller has a lot more weapons. And even if Sicilia keeps it on the feet, I just don't think Sicilia can mix it up enough to really threaten Miller. Now, what do the numbers kind of tell us on this part for this fight, Reed?
Well, I agree with you guys. I think Miller is the more dangerous, well-rounded guy. His grappling game is awesome. He is not afraid to attempt submissions at any time from any position, whether it's inverted, upside down, whatever. So I got to start at the top of the tape here, and the fact that Miller is going to have a 7-inch reach advantage is a big deal here, because the only times he's struggled with strikers or when they were, first of all, longer than Sicilia. Sicilia has a very short reach for his division. Miller struggled with a couple guys that were a little bit longer than Sicilia that also were very crisp. And Sicilia doesn't really quite have that. He has a history of knocking people out. He hasn't really done it as much so in UFC with his hands standing up anyway. But that does concern me. I mean, he's got a lot of ground to cover to try to get at Miller and make it his fight, and I just don't see that happening. So in this weight class, in this situation, this much reach differential, Miller's biggest risk should be mitigated there. And so then it becomes an issue of pace, who can control the range, and Miller's pretty good at he's gotten better at firing and not being hesitant on the trigger. Sicilia has a classic counter striker profile here. He tends to get outworked on his feet. So if that's the way it goes standing up, it's Miller's game, and then we know what's going to happen on the ground. Miller is going to be the more dangerous guy. He's going to be throwing these submissions and sweeps and everything. So the only way I think Miller loses this is if Cecilia clips him and gets inside and clips him, and so I think given that singular dimension of attack, Miller should be able to avoid that one avenue and make sure he watches that, but plays as more of his game. So he is a natural favorite here. I have noticed that his line keeps creeping up, which is a little bit dangerous because I would have jumped on him earlier on, but as the value gets clipped, I'm a little bit more hesitant. But given that they're featherweights, it's still, I think, a reasonably safe way to stay on the favorite.
Yeah, and one last thing I forgot to throw in there is, Cole Miller, is so big at the featherweight division that he starts to fade a little bit, especially in the third round. We even saw in his last fight where he got the win against Andy Ogle. Ogle was finally able to win the third round. So that is something to look out for, although I'm still not certain that Cecilia will be able to take full advantage of it because he might need a finish by the time that third round comes. Now moving on, we have a pivotal flyweight matchup featuring recent title challenger John Moraga coming in with a 13-2 record, taking on Roufusport product Dustin Ortiz, who is 12-2 overall with a 1-0 record in the UFC. So Nick, what's the oddsmaker's perspective here?
Moraga minus 270, the comeback on Ortiz plus 190. That was my opening line. Another spot that's kind of staying steady right now, 5 dimes. Moraga's minus 280 at the time of the recording. So a little bit of, I think, confusion out there for most people because they're not sure what to gauge about this fight. Because Moraga, he's coming off of obviously his title loss in the flyweight division, so he made it all the way to a title shot. Now, a little disclaimer here. Obviously the UFC flyweight division is fairly new still, so there's a short list of contenders basically. And Moraga won a couple fights, and he proved that he is in the upper echelon of that weight class, especially at the early stages of that division. So I think Moraga at this point is probably getting a little bit too much respect as far as ability goes. Now, again, this is a guy that made me money in the past, especially in his first couple fights. So I understand what he's bringing to the table, and I have a lot of respect for him. But I do think this is going to be a competitive fight with Ortiz because Demetrius Johnson, although he's obviously the best 125-pounder on the planet, he basically helped expose Moraga a little bit in some areas. So I think this is what the caution is in this fight, and mainly the ground game. I think that DJ took on enough times that Ortiz actually has a wrestling background. Now, Ortiz has been put on his back, and his wrestling has been spotting questionable at times as well. But that's definitely one strong suit about Ortiz's game. It's his grappling ability. The guy does have decent wrestling. He looks for the takedown. He looks for scrambles. He looks for ground and pound in top position. He looks for submissions. Ortiz has a very capable ground. So that's the interesting factor here. Can Moraga's takedown defense stuff Ortiz's shots? And if so, I think Moraga's probably going to win this fight because Moraga is the better striker overall. He has the heavier hands by far, and he does put pace. He looks to come forward. As far as pure speed advantage, when I was watching tape, I thought maybe Ortiz would have the speed advantage, but especially early on in the fight, when he does push the pace, he does bring a lot of speed with his hands as well. He's not going to be as fast as somebody like Dodson or, of course, Demetrius Johnson, but he is quicker than most people, I think, at the 125-pound division. And again, with that power that goes along with it, not a good combination for Ortiz, as he hasn't never been knocked out in a fight, but he has been rocked on several occasions, and Moraga can definitely rock him or even possibly put him out. So I'm going to go and pick Moraga because I do think that he should be the better fighter at this stage again in his career, but it's not a confident pick because I think if Ortiz hangs in there and doesn't get caught, especially after round 1, he could possibly steal round 2 and round 3 because he's another type of fighter that seems to get a little bit better as the fight goes on and turns it up a little bit. So Moraga tends to fade a little bit, and what we saw as far as stuffing takedowns and being controlled by DJ, I think Ortiz, as the fight goes on, might be able to do some of that stuff. That's why it's not really a very confident pick in Moraga, but again, I think he should have the wrestling to keep the fight standing in most cases, and he has the better striking. So both these guys have the jiu-jitsu. Both of them are pretty complete fighters, and both of them are good fighters for 125. So I'm glad to see them continue to get fights and continue to possibly move up the ladder, especially if Ortiz wins this. Obviously he's going to be considered a contender right away, even if it's overinflated because Moraga just had that title shot. So I think Moraga bounces back if he does get this win, which he should. He bounces back and at least stays relevant. Maybe another fight or two, he could possibly contend for another title shot himself. So an important fight at 125. We'll see how it unfolds, but I'm going to slightly pick Moraga.
All right, and I've got a little more confidence in Moraga than you do, Nick. I think, overall, he just has way more finishing ability. He's got real good power on the feet. He's got some decent submissions. I mean, most of his wins have actually been by submission. It's only been recently that he's really started to hone in on the striking. You saw that in his UFC debut where he just destroyed Ulysses Gomez. Even in his last fight, the title shot against Demetrius Johnson, he hurt Johnson in the 4th round. So, I'm not going to go out and say that he has conditioning issues. Fading a little bit against Demetrius Johnson in the 4th and 5th rounds is a little different than, like, say, in a 3-round fight where, he tapped out Chris Carriasso in the 3rd round of that fight. So, I mean, I think he can still go all 3 rounds pretty well, but, that is a bit of an issue when he's fending off takedowns. So it depends how aggressive Ortiz is going to be with the takedowns because, you look at Ortiz, he's been training at Roufusport for 2 years now. It's starting to kick in a little bit because I saw him the last time he actually lost, and he did not, and he looked much better in his UFC debut. But, even in that UFC debut against Tomei, he lost the 1st round. He takes a little bit of time to warm up a little bit, and he has some holes. I mean, you look, Ortiz, he takes some big shots. Like, his striking defense is not so good. I mean, he took some big leg kicks from Tomei. He took some big power punches. He actually got rocked in the 2nd round a little bit against Tomei, and he fights a little bit dirty. I mean, he landed not just 1 but 2 illegal low blows that gave him a bit of a break when he was losing the fight. So, that was interesting. I think Ortiz is pretty solid on the ground, so when he shoots in for takedowns, he gets them, he gets on top, he wins some scrambles. He has pretty good level changes, so, if Moraga gets lazy with a leg kick or a body kick, they could set up an opportunity for Ortiz. And I think he's got solid cardio, so as you mentioned, he gets a little stronger, and I think he could potentially win a 3rd round type of situation. I do not see him finishing Moraga, though. I think one thing that goes against Moraga, he really likes to go for the guillotine choke, and he does have a really solid guillotine, and Ortiz does leave himself open to it a little bit. But I think when you rely on sometimes, it leaves you open for a takedown, and as long as Ortiz knows what he's doing, he could get in, leave his neck out a little bit. Moraga goes for the guillotine and surrenders a takedown. So I definitely see that could be an issue. And overall, though, I think Moraga's pretty resourceful. His takedown defense is above average. I mean, against Johnson, an elite guy, I mean, it was exposed a little bit, but I don't think there's a lot of elite takedown artists in the flyweight division. And I think Moraga has pretty good footwork, and I think the best thing going for him is he usually controls the cage center and pushes forward. So Ortiz is going to be on the defensive a lot. So that could go in Moraga's favor just in terms of the judges. They like to see that guy being aggressive. So my pick is going to be Moraga. I think he's got a lot better ability to finish this fight. And, so I like Moraga. Now moving on to a very interesting middleweight matchup, we have a pair of very talented athletes in the Yoel Romero, a former Olympic silver medalist wrestler, coming in with a 6-1 record, coming off of 2 straight knockouts, taking on Derek Brunson, who is 11-2 and is also 2-0 in the UFC. So, Nick, where'd you open this line, and how has the public kind of shifted things?
Well, my original opener, minus 245 for Romero, the comeback on Brunson, plus 175. Steady action coming in on Romero. Right now, over 5 times, he's minus 280, and across the board at most books, he's around that spot. So just under 3-1 for Romero. You know what? I understand, I guess, why the people are coming in on Romero, because, man, the guy's just got devastating knockout power. The guy's athletic. He's a beast. You just mentioned his Olympic credentials. And the way he matches up with Brunson, I mean, you have wrestler versus wrestler, and you have the better striker in Romero with the more devastating knockout power going against a guy in Brunson, which, if there's a weakness in his game, it's definitely his stand-up. Even though he is coming off a nice knockout win with the head kick, and he's probably got underrated stand-up. In most people's minds, I think that's how they picture this fight. It's your typical powerhouse wrestler, knockout power guy versus the only way Brunson really wins this fight is by getting the fight to the floor. Maybe he gets a submission in here as well. I think, personally, the line's out of whack at this point. I do, again, think that Romero should be capable to keep this fight up and maybe land that knockout punch. And if there's going to be a little bit more of a suspect chin, I do think it belongs on Brunson here. But Romero, he's getting up there in age a little bit. I think he hasn't really proven himself, in my opinion, enough to really say that this line where it's at now at 3-1 is justified. So there's a lot of question marks at Brunson. I think his kicking game might cause Romero some problems on the feet as well. Again, he's got a little bit underrated power. He could possibly get Romero down, even though that wrestling background, I know what Romero brings to the table with that. So it's a tough fight here. I'm going to pick Romero because, again, I think more times than not, he should be able to keep the fight standing. And if there's going to be a stoppage in this fight, it's probably Romero knocking out Brunson. But the line is a little bit too high, in my opinion, and there could very well be some dog value in Brunson because he is the more proven fighter, in my opinion, and he's just a little bit more solid at this point in their career.
I know you're not supposed to do this, but I'm going to throw Romero's age out the window. He is 36 years old, but he fight like it. He is insanely athletic. I mean, you don't just not become an Olympian anymore, even though it was a long time ago. He still has that athleticism with him. He can throw these crazy kicks from a distance, this like side hook kick. He's got the jumping flying knee that knocked out Clifford Starks. He can throw really powerful leg kicks. He's very flexible. He's very explosive. The guy's just nasty. Now, I'm not going to take anything away from Brunson. I mean, Brunson's a solid athlete in his own right, a Division II wrestler, but that doesn't hold a candle to Romero's Olympic silver medal and all the amazing performances he put in international competition in wrestling. Now, I did wish that Yoel Romero had gotten into MMA a little sooner, but who cares? I mean, he's still coming into the UFC and just destroying people. Smashed Clifford Starks, as I said before, and then in his last fight, he's the first person to beat Ronnie Marcus, and he didn't just beat him. I mean, he knocked him out in the third round. That was impressive. Brunson is 2-0 in the UFC, so you got to give him a little bit of credit. But I mean, he beat near the end of his career Chris Lieben, and he caught Brian Houston with a left high kick in the first 15 seconds. So I think we're giving him a little too much credit right now. And he's still the same guy that got knocked out in like less than a minute by Jacare. And I think that Yoel Romero is a lot closer to a Jacare caliber fighter than anybody else. So I think Brunson could give a threat with the wrestling, because even though Romero is the amazing credentialed wrestler, he wants to stay on the feet, and he can be taken down. He got taken down a couple times by Marcus. So if Brunson just focuses on the wrestling and works for the takedowns and tries to lay and pray, maybe he can do something. But Romero does scramble back to his feet really well, and I think Romero's going to present way too many problems here. Age gap or not, Romero is too good in my opinion, and I think Romero probably knocks him out. So both guys do fade a little bit late in the fight, but I think if anybody fades first, it's going to be Brunson, because he's got to try so hard to get this fight to the ground. So I like Romero by knockout. Reed, what do the numbers tell us?
Yeah, the numbers are interesting because when I look at the tail of the tape, this is one of those that makes my spreadsheet throw an alert at me. Because historically, whenever I find a situation where one guy is much younger and has a big reach advantage, that's cause for pause. Historically, people in that scenario tend to outperform betting lines. So I looked at this one and said, okay, Romero is pushing 37. He's at a 5-inch reach disadvantage. Both guys are southpaws, so they kind of cancel each other out. And so historically, both guys will actually perform slightly worse than they normally do. But how do they really match up in terms of performance stats? Both guys can knock people out. In fact, Romero has only won by strikes. He's never won any other way. I mean, corner stoppage or knockout, flying knee. He only wins by TKO or KO, which is weird. He's a wrestler. Keep in mind, his appearance in the Olympics was in 2000. That was 14 years ago. He was a much younger man back then. And ironically, he has yet to land a single takedown in the UFC. So if this is a round-by-round analysis, who is better equipped to win the rounds? It appears to be Brunson. He has, he can control the pace. He's got the reach. He's got a little bit more mix-up in his game. And so if it actually goes round to round, he has the ability to win some rounds as a huge underdog. I don't think it will go that many rounds. I think it will be over sooner than that. I think both guys have power. Both guys also are able to be hit. On one side, you've got Brunson. He has poor strike defense. He gets hit a lot. On the other side, you got Romero pushing 37. When he gets hit, he tends to get dropped a lot. So his knockdown rate, his knockdown defensive rate, his chin rating is poor. So all these things are telling me if they just stand and trade, this could be over quickly. Someone's going to get knocked out. And the further the line goes towards Romero, I will be a voice of dissent. The more I think that there might be value on an underdog play. But I also think that when you look at a situation like this, maybe the best bet isn't trying to pick that coin flip winner. Maybe the best bet is to figure out a prop or an over-under or an inside-the-distance play. So we'll see where the betting lines end up. I definitely see some sort of play on this fight.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now, moving on, we have a bantamweight contest featuring TJ Dillashaw coming in with an 8-2 record against Mike Easton, who is 13-3 overall. So, Nick, where'd you open this one, and what have the odds kind of told you so far?
Well, my opener was Dillashaw minus 230, the comeback on Easton plus 170. And again, over 5 dimes right now, Dillashaw minus 270. Looking across to the screen, he's ballpark around 270, almost creeping up to 3-1. This fight, Dillashaw definitely should be a solid favorite going into this fight. He's got, of course, a little bit more of the public support, a little bit more of the public hype. Although I got to say that Easton, when he did enter the UFC, making his debut in the first couple fights in, he had a tremendous amount of hype as well. I think fighters, or I guess the general public, is kind of hopping off his bandwagon a little bit, and that's not a very surprise. I guess I'm not that surprised based on his last few performances. But in my opinion, Easton has shown a lot of growth. Now, getting into the way they match up, I mean, obviously, the striking realm, I think, is going to be pretty close. Dillashaw, I think, has a little bit of the more capable power and accuracy on the feet. He's getting a little bit more dangerous. I think Dwayne Ludwig actually, of course, has a lot to do with that with the alpha male, since he's come to alpha male and helped those guys out with their striking. I think that Dillashaw has really improved in that area, so he's become a little bit more dangerous. He's got decent boxing, has some power. He uses his high kicks a lot. Which he's able to because he can usually control where the fight goes. He doesn't have to worry about it because his wrestling's so good as far as getting taken down using those kicks. And he does like to push forward. So Dillashaw, very aggressive, but the same type of fighter in a lot of ways is Mike Easton here. His striking, he is a southpaw, so he's got that kind of advantage. I mean, he's going to be a little bit of a challenge, I think, to Dillashaw in that aspect. Easton has power in his hands. Now, he might not be as accurate on the feet as Dillashaw, but he does push forward, and his boxing is improving. So I do see that growth in his game. And he does like to throw kicks as well. So surprisingly, both these guys kind of have a wrestling base, but again, they like to throw kicks, and they're very effective with their kicks at times. Now, the grappling, of course, Easton isn't going to have the wrestling credentials that Dillashaw has. He's not going to, shouldn't be as effective. I think he can keep this fight up because as he's grown as a fighter, I could see his takedown defense improving as well. So Easton, not very easy to take down. I know he got put on his back a couple times in his last fight, but he tends to get up pretty quick and not stay on his back long. So I think the wrestling in this fight should probably neutralize each other out, and it's going to be a very competitive fight. If it does hit the cards, I think it's going to be a very close 29-28, maybe unanimous decision, or even a split decision. I'm going to go with Dillashaw as far as a pick because I think he's going to do enough, or he should do enough to push the pace and maybe land the cleaner shots and possibly take Easton's back, as he likes to. Everybody knows that Dillashaw loves to hop on the back, and he's very capable of finishing fight there as well, but I don't think that's going to be the case. Easton has good submission defense. So, but I just think that Dillashaw it's a very possibility that Dillashaw does steal a decision here against Easton, so I'm going to go there, but I do expect a very competitive fight, and it's another situation where there could be some betting value on Easton if it is a split decision type of fight.
Yeah, and looking at this fight, I think the one thing that really stands out to me is I think Mike Easton, for all the forward pressure and aggression that he throws, he's almost like a Leonard Garcia-esque, where even though he's got a slight reach advantage, I think, heading in, that he wings hooks, and it hurts his reach. It hurts his ability to get to his opponent. He very rarely hits his opponent with punches. Looking overall at his ability to strike, his most devastating strikes are his leg kicks, occasional, and these are rare, body and head kicks, and knees. it's the low attacks that he's actually more successful in. That's actually the attacks that got him his one UFC stoppage against Byron Bloodworth. Dillashaw, on the other hand, he actually throws pretty solid straight punches. His straight right hand is very powerful. He's hurt multiple opponents there. He's also hurt opponents with the head kicks. So, he's a little more well-rounded on the feet, and that's only going to get better, now that he's training at Team Alpha Male with Dwayne Ludwig. So I'm really starting to dig, what TJ Dillashaw's, bringing right here. And the other thing about Easton, he kind of thrives on just that forward pressure, forcing his opponents to back up. And, even if he's not being that active, that really gives him the advantage in the judges' scorecards, that he's forcing his opponent backwards the whole time. But, Dillashaw's not the type of fighter that's going to, let that stand. He's going to push back. And, we saw in that last fight against Brad Pickett for Easton, when a fighter pushes back on him, he kind of wilts a little bit. He surrenders takedowns. Maybe that great offensive ability where he was not getting taken down was due to the fact that he was putting so much pressure on his opponents. But, when there is some pressure being put back, he gives it up a little bit. And I think, if he's pushing forward too much, then Dillashaw could take him down. I'm not saying Dillashaw's going to submit him, but, Easton could be vulnerable there. He does have solid Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu skills, Easton, but I really don't think they're going to matter against Dillashaw unless he hurts Dillashaw. Now, that is the one advantage for Easton heading in here is chin strength. Dillashaw, he got knocked out against John Dodson, he got rocked and dropped against Hugo Viana, and he got hurt briefly against Sunsao in his last fight. So he is a little vulnerable in the chin department, and Easton, he can take a shot. So, maybe if Easton turns this into a firefight and is able to get inside, he could take advantage, but I just don't see it. I think Dillashaw is able to mix it up a little bit more, and Dillashaw should probably walk away with a decision. I don't see Dillashaw getting a stoppage here. So what do the numbers kind of tell us, Reed?
Well, I'm looking at the stat line, and neither one of them leaps off the page in terms of positive characteristics being extraordinary. They're both kind of well-rounded, not exceptional. The striking accuracy is actually not terribly good, especially for Easton. That's really probably the biggest hole in his game is his striking accuracy. So the question on the ground is interesting because Easton simply hasn't spent a lot of time there, and he hasn't done a whole lot when he did get there, whereas Dillashaw has been much more aggressive. He's attempted a lot of submissions, and he also has been aggressive in getting back control. So whereas Easton stalls out in guard, Dillashaw finds a way to get the back, finds a way to get the mount, been all over the place. Again, you guys have pointed out they're probably more evenly matched than Dillashaw's last opponents when it comes to the grappling game. The real question is, I don't see either one dominating the other, and I look back at Easton's fights, he's matched pace a couple times very evenly with guys, and so is Dillashaw, and they've been on both sides of decisions, and so I don't really see one guy dominating the other. Dillashaw has a slightly higher cage control stat, but Easton is a slightly higher paced striker. So back and forth, it tells me that a line that goes very strongly in favor of the slight favorite is a dangerous one to chase, so that a lot of juice to lay. But also I'm not really banking on a big upset. So this may be a situation where I have to pass on making a play here. It will be interesting because whether or not Dillashaw's striking technical skills, his proficiency and accuracy and defense has improved, that could be the difference because he already has a slight advantage in terms of accuracy. If he gets any better, then that could be the game changer here. So this is one where I'm still waiting to really see who these fighters are before I start making picks on them.
All right, great stuff, Reed. Now, moving on to the co-featured bout of the evening, we have a middleweight contest featuring Lorenz Larkin, who comes in with a 14-1 record and 1 no contest against Ultimate Fighter Season 11 veteran Brad Tavares, who enters with an 11-1 overall record. So, Nick, where'd you open this fight, and what has the betting public kind of told you so far?
My opener, Larkin -210, Tavares +160. this line, staying ballpark right now at 5 dimes minus 220, and looking across at the market, it's holding steady around 220 or so. So a little bit more support coming in on Larkin. And, you know, I thought he'd probably get even more so, because I've always been a big fan of Larkin. I mean, how could you not be if you're a fight fan? The guy has a tremendous amount of striking skill, and he's fun to watch. I mean, he's technical, but at the same time a little bit unorthodox. You don't know what he's going to hit you with. I mean, the guy mixes everything up so well. He's just a tremendous all-around striker. He's got good power, good footwork, good movement. He goes to the body. He has good fight IQ. Just, again, fun to watch. And the weakest part of Larkin's game has always been his wrestling, his takedown defense, and his grappling ability. I know for a fact the guy's been working hard, and you could tell his progress in his last few fights. I mean, very hard to take down, very hard to control. If you do put him on his back, I mean, the guy's even throwing up omoplata attempts. I mean, nothing serious, but it's funny to see a striker that's gaining that kind of knowledge on the ground. So his ground game's getting solid. Again, what I just talked about, his striking attributes, fun to watch. I mean, the guy's a very excellent fighter, and he's got a lot of potential. That being said, Tavares has been, I think, a very solid fighter, and he's overperformed in a lot of cases. I mean, the guy continues to improve. If you watch his growth from the Ultimate Fighter till now, I mean, the guy's a completely different fighter. He's got better cardio. That's the first thing I've noticed, which is huge. I mean, sometimes if you're a fighter and you continue to work on your cardio, you don't see that growth. And Tavares, even though he does tend to slow down in round 2 and round 3 a little bit, I still see his cardio, again, getting better with his boxing, which tends to get better as well. Working at Extreme Couture with the coaching staff over there for a while now, staying dedicated. I know that, you know, that's really showing in his stand-up game as well. He comes forward, pushes the pace. He's got a nice 1-2 combo. He stays busy on the feet. He's really, in most cases, a very aggressive fighter. Now, he also likes to use his boxing and his pushing forward to get you up against a cage, clinch with you there, do some dirty boxing, look for a takedown or two, and he's successful at doing that. So, to me, this is a very interesting and tough fight, because I know Larkin should outpoint Tavares on the feet, to say the least, even possibly stop Tavares, because Larkin's that gifted of a striker. But it's all up to the game plan of Tavares here. I think if he can push the pace, if he can pin Larkin up against the cage, especially in round 2 and round 3, as both fighters start to get a little bit tired and slow down, I think we're going to see another close decision. So I know a lot of people are banking on Larkin coming through here as an easy win. I do think he is going to get the W here, because, again, he's the better fighter and should win more times than not. But the state of MMA judging, as we always say, in another very competitive fight, it might be another dog or pass situation here. But I'm going to pick Larkin. He is the better fighter. I'm not sure if he's going to come through.
Yeah, and what sticks out for me in terms of Larkin, he's really explosive when he's at distance, when he's out in open space. Very light on his feet. He's got this really nice, diverse attack where, you know, he can throw spinning back kicks. He can throw good low kicks, head kicks. A really solid, diverse kicking game. The one thing that scares me with him is he does have this tendency to get pressed into the fence. We saw it in Strikeforce when he fought guys like Nick Rossborough or Gian Vellante, and then we saw it in the UFC when he got his only real career loss against Francis Carmon in a fight where, you know, he didn't get taken down, but he got pressed into the fence for the majority of the fight, and even though he was dishing out some punishment, hitting back with some knees and elbows and stuff, you know, he was just in the worst position with his back against the fence for the majority of the time, and the judges sided with Carmon. So, you know, that's something that does scare me, because Tavares has a solid offensive clinch game where he usually is the aggressor in the clinch, and, you know, he's not afraid to go in the clinch whatsoever. Both guys actually dish out a lot of damage in the clinch. Larkin had some really good elbows in his last fight against Chris Camozzi. Tavares has some nasty knees. He's got some good tie ability. Overall, Tavares, I think he uses his jab a lot better than Larkin. Larkin relies more on, you know, speed and explosion than Tavares. Tavares is more traditional. I think both guys land good leg kicks. You know, Tavares in his last fight really, you know, made some nasty welts on Bubba McDaniel after just 2 kicks. So he's capable of, you know, hurting his opponents. And I think Tavares does mix up his grappling ability with his striking very well. You know, throw a couple kicks and then shoot in for a takedown or press his opponent against the fence. Larkin more just wants to stand and trade. So that factors in. I think one thing that does scare me a little bit, I don't think Tavares' takedown or striking defense is that good. So if Larkin can get in there with something quick, he might catch him off guard. I think Tavares does have a slower, more plodding striking style, so that can get taken advantage of by a quick fighter that uses good footwork. And obviously, Larkin has some really good footwork. And I think the other thing, he brought this up earlier, the reach advantage. That is interesting. If Tavares is able to use his jab effectively, that could neutralize Larkin's explosiveness. But I do think Larkin, as long as he keeps it in the open, in the middle of the cage, Larkin should take this. But I think Tavares is also a live dog, as you mentioned, Nick. So my pick is Larkin. Not a ton of confidence, not nearly as much confidence in it as when I initially looked at the fight before doing some study. So Reed, what do the numbers tell us?
Well, you made a few points that are interesting. The numbers do back it up. First of all, Tavares does have a good jab. That's actually arguably one of his better maneuvers is using the head jab, and he is high pace. He's able to outwork his opponents. And Larkin he's more of a strike and fade kind of guy. You call him explosive and accurate. It's very hard to hit him. His head strike defense is the best on this card. His opponents just have a tough time finding the target. So I do see Larkin as the more gifted striker for sure, but I am worried about whether or not he gets pushed around and whether or not he's able to maintain pace, because he's fighting a guy who likes to control the cage, and Tavares also just simply averages a higher pace of work. You mentioned the clinch game. That is actually the one real negative stat on Larkin's game. He spends almost a third of his time in fights in the clinch, and yet he's the one being pushed against the cage for the vast majority of that time. So that is a danger zone for him. You're right, he needs to stay on the open mat and fight his game from a distance, in and out, strike and fade, and if he can do that, he wins. He does more damage, I believe, and he's going to be the one landing the harder strikes. However, I think you guys are both right. Tavares could make this a difficult fight for Larkin if he jams him, if he pushes him up against the wall, if he keeps pursuing. That's a problem. So, live dog for sure. Tavares he definitely has the ability to win this. I still do lean Larkin. I think his striking just keeps impressing me more and more as he goes, and he's just so hard to hit. And so if they start duking it out, the slight reach differential probably shouldn't be a huge difference, because Larkin generally is at a reach disadvantage. So he's looked this good even though he's been at a disadvantage, even in his last fight against Kamosi, who's very long for the division. So I think he overcomes that, and he hurts Tavares at some point. But you're right, if the line goes too far, there is some risk, because Tavares there are a few paths to say he could make this a close decision, and then you know how decisions are. A third of the time the judges disagree. So that's why this is a tough one to call.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Now, let's move on to the final fight of the evening. It is a very intriguing middleweight contest featuring two top 10 middleweights in former Strikeforce middleweight champion Luke Rockhold, coming in with a 10-2 record, taking on Costa Philippou, who is 12-3 with one no contest overall. So, Nick, what's the oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Well, getting into this fight right away, by the time it was said and done, I had to open Rockhold a high favorite, and I think it's justified. Minus 405 was my opener. The comeback on Philippou, plus 285. I have a lot of respect for Philippou. He's a very talented fighter, but matchups are everything. So that's exactly why I opened this fight the way I did. Philippou did get exposed in his last fight. And early on in his career, too. The ground game and takedown disadvantage against some fighters that Philippou's had, that seemed to be his kryptonite. And, of course, in the last fight against Carmont, that was exposed and put out there in the forefront a little bit more so. Rockhold is more than capable of doing that. He has a very solid wrestling background. But not just that. The way these guys match up, even on the feet, Philippou generally has a striking advantage over most opponents. I mean, he doesn't really push the pace that much, but his footwork and his boxing, well, his ability to mix things up, period, especially his boxing, highlighted by his hands, are very effective and a very technical, powerful, solid striker. So he does have the advantage, like I said, over most fighters. But even if this fight does stay up, I think Rockhold's ability to mix things up on the feet with his kicks and with his long reach. I mean, I believe he has a 4-inch reach advantage over Philippou coming into this fight. And again, he uses his hands well. He has a nice lead jab. He punches with combos, mixes things up, goes to the body a little bit. So Rockhold is a very impressive fighter to watch, even on the feet. But what makes the difference here, to me, again, is the ability to probably outpoint Philippou on the feet that Rockhold has, and not just that, but he can probably get Philippou on the ground and dictate where the fight goes that way. He can also submit Philippou. I know overall in the UFC, Philippou's defense, submission defense has been pretty good, but Rockhold at times could be on another level on the ground. So in all aspects of this fight, I just don't see it looking good for Philippou. I think he's going to have to land that knockout punchers type of chance that he's got to win this fight, but that's about it. So it is a steep line right now at the sportsbooks. Is staying around 4-1 at 5 times. It's -390 for Rockhold. So a little bit of support coming in on the dog, but make no mistake, it's going to stay steady because there is some parlay action going to come back in on Rockhold. So line staying steady, and I think it is justified. Rockhold should win this fight more times than not.
Looking at this main event, there's a reason that Costa Philippou's the biggest underdog. I mean, Luke Rockhold is a huge, huge middleweight, and Philippou has a small reach. He doesn't really do a whole lot other than incorporate some really sharp counter-striking. And potentially that could play into, Rockhold could play into that. If there's any way that Philippou can win this fight, basically Rockhold has one weakness. He likes to throw single power strikes, whether it's big kicks or big punches, and he does leave himself exposed. So if Rockhold throws a big kick or a big punch, Philippou, being such a solid professional counter-striker, I can see Philippou diving in and landing a big shot. Philippou does have some power. Rockhold's chin is not the greatest, so that is one way, and probably the only way, that Philippou can win this fight, because Rockhold is more well-rounded. Rockhold's better on the ground. Rockhold is longer. He can work from a distance better. Rockhold throws way more kicks. Philippou is starting to throw a few kicks, but man, I'm not a big fan of Philippou's career decision-making. He was training at Cerro Longo's, right alongside Chris Weidman every day, and then what's he do? He leaves the gym and then goes and loses his last fight convincingly to Francis Carmon. He's still training at this kickboxing gym in Long Island, and now he's facing another elite guy in Luke Rockhold, and I just don't think that Philippou has the tools. All the measurables are with Luke Rockhold heading into this fight, and man, it's kind of frustrating because Philippou was a guy that people were really high on. He was on a nice little winning streak, but he got exposed in that last fight, and I think he might get exposed again here. There's too many holes in his game, and I think Rockhold has the ability to expose them. So, whether it's in the clinch where Rockhold shoots in and you can get takedowns. I mean, you saw him even in the last fight. Rockhold shot in for a takedown against Vitor. He didn't get it, but I think against somebody like Philippou, he might be able to do it. So he still has that in his back pocket, even if the stand-up isn't going that well. And Philippou can't. If Philippou is losing the stand-up, he has nowhere else to go. So that really hurts when you're not a very well-rounded fighter. And I think that's going to play a big part in this fight. So did the numbers back us up, Reed?
Yes, they do. It's certainly a stacked deck against Philippou. Starting on the tail of the tape, Luke Rockhold is going to be much younger, much longer, and the southpaw. That's tough to face in any situation. And then you layer on the performance stats. The one that jumps off the page for Rockhold on the positive is his stand-up striking ratio. So does he control the cage? And he tends to outwork opponents by 80%, which is a huge number. It's the highest number of any fighter on this card. Philippou is more evenly matched. He tends to do a pretty good job, but it's basically even back and forth with his opponents. But Rockhold not only is rangy, but he's good at using that range and keeping people off and pushing them around, outworking them. Now, the one area where Rockhold has not been great is his takedown offense. It hasn't been too much of a problem until, of course, he went up against Vitor Belfort. He chooses mostly to shoot for takedowns, and that's always a bad idea because it's a much lower success rate. So justifiably, his takedown success rate is actually pretty bad. But I don't know if that's really going to come into play. I think, first of all, Rockhold does have the tools to win rounds. He's also got knockout power. He does mix up his attack pretty well. And then on the ground, he's got crazy submissions. So however it ends up there, he's probably the more dangerous guy there. And I don't think Philippou is going to want to go there regardless. So the longer it stands, these guys will tire. Rockhold should have the better gas tank. It really is it's a stacked deck. And Philippou, of course, he's got knockout power. His knockdown rate is well above the average for middleweight, but he's got to find that chin, and that's going to be difficult. He's got to close the distance. Rockhold is a little bit more durable. He's younger, so it's a tough proposition. So I can see why the line is the most skewed of any line on the card for this fight. So we'll have to think about how best to extract value out of that matchup.
Solid stuff there, Reed. So that does it for our complete UFC Fight Night 35 event breakdown. Make sure to check out part 2 of the Premium Oddscast soon, which will reveal our premium bets for the event. Those bets can only be accessed if you're a member of MMA Oddsbreaker Premium, so make sure to sign up if you want to cash in. Our New Year's sale is ending this upcoming event, so check out the MMAOddsbreaker.com homepage if you're interested. Also, make sure to follow @PremiumOddscast on Twitter, where we'll reveal our free bet for UFC Fight Night 35 shortly after weigh-ins, if we do indeed have one. You can also gain access to the free plays via our email service. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsbreaker.com if you'd like to gain access to our emailing list. You may also want to like our Premium Oddscast Facebook page of the same name. Last but not least, you may have seen his eye-opening appearance on the MMA Hour. Make sure to check out our very own Reed Kuhn's new book, Fightnomics, which is now available via Kindle and on paperback at Amazon.com. Special thanks to our sponsor, 5 Dimes, and we'll see you on part 2 of the Premium Oddscast this Wednesday. Good luck and happy betting, everyone.